Betty Boop, Boop-A-Doop.
Boop-A-Doop-A-Doop-A-Doop.
So today's video is going to start a bit differently. Instead of jumping right into it like we usually do, I'm going to preface and say that the episode we're talking about does not have a lot of lore, nor does it connect to the overall greater lore of the Betty Boop mythos, I'll put it. But I do want to talk about Betty Boop, so since everything we're talking about is Betty Boop, it doesn't matter that it's not connected. I'm going to connect it. The painting I made itself is based off a poster I found for the episode itself being Red Hot Momma, as you can see. I switched up the pose a bit so that she's grabbing her dress, which is a frame in the episode. I'll put that up right now, along with the poster so that you can see. And I made it so that it's all encompassing of the episode. You got the little fire guys, one holding their fan, fanning its flame, the other with a little ice cream cone. We've got these demons in the foreground lurking, with the center one being the king with his crown. The Betty Boop font with the coloring in red, gold and red, is meant to be similar to the poster. She's got that Marilyn Monroe sort of flared dress pose going on. When making this piece of art, I meant to sort of make it like a movie poster. When I said it's got like all the characters, it's meant to show you a little piece of the episode. And now we can talk about the episode Red Hot Momma, released in 1934. It starts on a snowy winter's night, as Betty Boop is shivering in her bed trying to sleep. She shuts all the windows, but that isn't enough, so she lights a fire by the fireplace and falls asleep by the rug. The heat by the flames seems to twist the environment around her, and that causes the fireplace to become the gates of hell. Betty then wakes up to explore the underworld and sings Hell's Bells for Satan and his minions.
Hell's bells ringing in my ear. It's certainly hot, the rhythm that's swell. Now somebody's got a hold of those bells.
When the minions and Satan try to put the moves on Betty, she gives the demons the cold shoulder, and then she gives Satan a literal icy stare. Hell begins to freeze over, and she falls through a hole in the ice, waking up back in her original house because a snowstorm blew open the door. She goes to bed, but this time under a pile of warm quilts. As you can see, it was all a dream. Ooh, dream. Coma theory. Coma theory. Ooh. Now, as for Easter eggs or references, other than Betty Boop giving the cold shoulder, which is a fun visual gag, all we have is in 1934 it was banned in China because the depictions of hell were unsuitable for public distribution, and it was also banned in the UK because it depicted hell in a humorous manner, which was deemed blasphemous. Now I'll tell you that's funny. Betty Boop's first appearance was in the cartoon Dirty Dishes, released on August 9th, 1930, the seventh installment of Fleischer's Talkertoon series. Betty Boop is a cartoon character designed by Grim Natwick at the request of Max Fleischer. She originally appeared in the Talkertoons and then in the Betty Boop film series, which were produced by Fleischer Studios and then released by Paramount Pictures. She was featured in 90 theatrical cartoons between 1930 and 1939. She has also been featured in comic strips and prolific mass merchandising throughout the decades. Inspired by popular performing styles at the time, Betty Boop as a character was originally created as an anthropomorphic French poodle. Okay, we'll get back to more of that in a second. Clara Bow is sometimes given credit as being the inspiration for Betty Boop, though Fleischer told his artist he wanted a caricature of the singer Helen Kane. Kane later sued Fleischer over the signature Boop-A-Doop line. Betty Boop appeared as a supporting character in 10 cartoons as a flapper girl with more heart than brains. In individual cartoons, she was called Nancy Lee or Nancy McGrew, derived from the Helen Kane film Dangerous Nan McGrew. And just so we're clear, Max Fleischer wasn't just parodying Helen Kane, he wasn't just using her as inspiration, he was straight up copying Helen Kane's movies, shows, and likeness.
Who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I?
which later led to a lawsuit, but more on that in a moment. Betty Boop usually served as the girlfriend to the studio star Bimbo. It was a different time. Within a year, Betty made the transition from an incidental human canine breed to a completely human female character. While much of her credit is given to Grim Natwick for helping transition Max Fleischer's creation, her transformation into cute cartoon girl was also due to the work of Bernard Wolfe, Otto Foyer, Seymour Neidl, Ronald Dot Crandall, Willard Boesky, and James Seamus Culhane. By the release of Any Rags, Betty Boop was forever established as a human character. Her floppy poodle ears became hoop earrings, and her black poodle nose became a girl's button-like nose. Betty was first voiced by Margie Hines. Later, several different voice actresses performed the role, including Kate Wright, Bonnie Poe, and Anne Rothschild, also known as Little Ann Little, and especially Mae Questel, who began voicing Betty Boop in Silly Scandals from 1931 and continued her role until 1939. She also returned nearly 50 years later in Disney's Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988. Today, Betty is voiced by Cindy Robinson since 2015. Since the character was created by an Austrian Jew and eventually voiced by a Jewish actress, Mae Questel, animation fans sometimes try to pinpoint various aspects that hint at Betty's Jewishness. The 1932 Talkertoon is particularly one of those. Minnie the Moocher featured the only appearance of Betty's parents, a strict immigrant couple. They get upset over the fact that Betty does not want to eat the traditional German foods like Hessenhefer, which is rabbit stew. Benjamin Ivory of Forward says any evidence is ambiguous, as these foods are not kosher foods, and the accents of the parents are comical German accents rather than Jewish accents. You know, some sources say she's Jewish, some sources say she's not. I don't know. I mean, she was created by a Jewish man, and there's a lot of influences in the cartoons which kind of hint at.
I want ham. Wake up, ambitious. Where's my Cornelius? Mach schnell.
All I'll say is, whether she is or not, she's welcome in my eyes. Betty, you're welcome in my eyes. Minnie the Moocher defined Betty's character as a teenager in the modern era, at odds with the odd world and ways of her parents. In the cartoon, after a disagreement with her strict parents, Betty runs away from her home, accompanied by her boyfriend Bimbo, only to get lost in a haunted cave. They meet a ghostly walrus, which is a rotoscoped version of Cab Calloway, as he sings the song Minnie the Moocher, accompanied by several other ghosts and skeletons. This haunting performance sends the frightened Betty and Bimbo back to their home of safety. Minnie the Moocher served as a promotion for Calloway's subsequent stage appearances, and also established Betty Boop as a cartoon star. The 8 Talkertoons that followed all starred Betty, leading her into her own series beginning in 1932, with the release of Stopping the Show in August 1932. And the Talkertoons were replaced by the Betty Boop series, which continued for the next 7 years. Betty Boop is regarded as one of the first and best known sex symbols on the animated screen. She is a symbol of the Depression era and a reminder of the more carefree days of the Jazz Age flapper. Her popularity was drawn largely from adult audiences, and the cartoons, while seemingly surreal, contained many sexual and psychological elements, particularly in the 1932 Talkertoon Minnie the Moocher, featuring Cab Calloway and his orchestra. Betty Boop was unique among female cartoon characters, differentiating herself from others like Minnie Mouse, because she represented a sexual woman. While the character was kept pure and girl-like on screen, compromises to her virtue were a challenge. The studio's 1931 Christmas card featured Betty in bed with Santa Claus, winking at the viewer. The Talkertoons The Bum Bandit and The Dizzy Red Riding Hood were given distinctly impure endings. And officially, Betty is only 16 years old. Pause. 16? 16, you say? Let's check the American standards.
Beep boo boo bop boo boo beep.
I don't know how it looks, you New York animators. It says 18 up there, but you made her 16. That seems a bit suspicious. I know she's got those baby-like Boop-A-Doop characteristics, but you didn't have to make her 16. It seems a bit suspicious. But she had German parents, so we might have to go by German standards.
Beep boo boo bop boo boo bop.
I don't know if that makes it more or less suspicious. All I'm going to say is,
Hey, sweetheart, how'd you like to take a ride on a real bike? She's 16!
Betty Boop, you're okay. You did nothing wrong, Betty Boop.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Although in some cartoons like The Bum Bandit, she is portrayed as a married woman with children with an adult's voice, rather than the standard Boop-A-Doop voice. This next part of the paragraph goes over the many times in which Betty was accosted by men in her cartoons. But it's the bottom part of the paragraph that I would like to focus on. You can pause if you would like to read the whole thing. According to Jill Harris of Mental Floss, these portrayals of Betty Boop fighting off sexual harassment on the animated screen made many see her as a feminist icon. Many do see Betty Boop as a feminist icon. They see her as a sex symbol. They see her as a symbol for women and empowerment. And the thing is, I'm not here to take away from that. Betty Boop has changed drastically over the years. What she means to women and people of all ages has changed drastically over the years. Some people still see her as a sexual cartoon character. Some people see her as a symbol of empowerment. The thing is, I'm not here to take away from that or change anyone's opinion. I'm just here to tell you she does have a complicated history. And I bet some of you probably didn't know that she was originally created by Max Fleischer to be a 16-year-old, which when you think about it is a bit weird, creating a 16-year-old girl in a hypersexual way for primarily an adult audience. What are you animators doing? What are you doing? But like I said, I'm not here to change anyone's opinion. Some of you probably didn't know she was 16. I didn't even know that. And like I said, she's changed over the years in terms of what she means to people. And I'm not here to take that away. I'm just here to lay out her facts. I'm just here to lay out the history and just tell you that yes, many do see her as a feminist icon, although many do just see her. Let's just say Betty was sometimes at the mercy of her animators.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Moving on. What many consider to be Betty Boop's best and most memorable appearances are in her first 3 years due to her jazz baby characteristics and her innocent sexuality, which was primarily aimed at adults, but in the context of her films was affected by the National Legion of Decency and the Production Code of 1934, which imposed strict guidelines on the motion picture industry and placed more specific restrictions on the content in which films could refer to sexual innuendos. This greatly affected the Betty Boop cartoons. No longer a carefree flapper from the date the code went into effect, on July 1st, 1934, Betty Boop had become a housewife, or a career girl, who wore a fuller dress and skirt. Additionally, as time progressed, the curls in her hair gradually decreased in number. She also eventually stopped wearing her gold bracelets and hoop earrings, and she became more mature and wiser in her personality compared to her earlier years. Right from the start, Joseph Breen, the new head film censor, had numerous complaints and ordered the removal of the suggestive introduction, which started the cartoons with Betty winking at the camera and shaking her hips, which were deemed suggestive of immorality. Now I'll tell you that's funny. While these cartoons were more tame compared to their earlier appearances, their self-conscious wholesomeness was aimed at a more juvenile audience, which contributed to the decline of the series. Much of the decline was also due to the lessening of Betty's role in the cartoons in favor of her co-stars, not to mention Fleischer's biggest rising success, Popeye. There was a similar problem experienced during the same period with Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse, who was becoming eclipsed by the popularity of his co-stars Donald Duck, Goofy, and Pluto. The Betty Boop comic strip by Bud Conahan was distributed by King Features Syndicate from July 23, 1934 to November 28, 1937. Then, from November 19th, 1984 to January 31st, 1988, a revival strip made with Felix the Cat was called Betty Boop and Felix, which was produced by Mort Walker's sons, Brian, Neil, Greg, and Morgan. And then later on again in 1990, the first comics published under Betty Boop's big break, a 52-page original graphic novel by Joshua Quagmire, Milton Knight, and Leslie Cabajar. In 2016, Dynamite Entertainment published new Betty Boop comics with 20 pages of alternative American graphic novel style. 4 issues were released. In the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Betty Boop was voiced one more time by Mae Questel before her death in 1998. The character appears in a scene with Eddie Valent. At the end, she appears in a crowd with a group of other cartoon characters who all sing Smile Darn Ya Smile. Betty appeared in the first color classic cartoon Poor Cinderella, her only theatrical color appearance in 1934. In the short, which was filmed in Cinecolor, she was depicted with red hair as opposed to her typical black hair. In May 1932, Helen Kane filed a $250,000 infringement lawsuit against Fleischer Studios, Max Fleischer, and Paramount Publics Corporation for the deliberate caricature that preceded unfair competition, exploiting Helen Kane's personality and image. While Kane had risen to fame in the late 1920s as the Boop-A-Doop girl, her career was nearly at its end by 1931, and Paramount promoted the development of Betty Boop following Kane's decline. This case was brought in New York in 1934. On April 19th, Fleischer Studios testified that Betty Boop was purely a product of his imagination and was detailed by members of his staff. Theatrical manager Lou Bolton testified that Kane had witnessed an African American child performer, Baby Esther, full name Esther Jones, using a similar vocal style in the act of the Everglades Restaurant Club in Midtown Manhattan. In April or May 1928, under the cross-examination, Bolton had said that he had met with Kane at the club after Esther's performance, but could not say when she had walked in. Bolton stated, Paramount's lawyers paid him $200 to come to New York. Esther's name was given in the trial as Esther Jones. During the trial, Lou Bolton, who was Esther Jones' manager, testified in his belief that she was in Paris. An early test sound-on-disc film was produced, which was later lost after the trial, in which featured Esther performing her distinct style and introduced it as evidence. In the film, Esther sings 3 songs that have been popularized by Helen Kane: Don't Be Like That, Is There Anything Wrong With That, and What a Duh, which writer Mark Langer says was hardly proof that Helen Kane derived her singing style from Baby Esther. Jazz studies scholar Robert O'Malley has stated that they might very well have been cooked up by Fleischer Studios to discredit Kane, whom they later admitted had been their model for Betty Boop. O'Malley questioned if some sort of deal existed between Paramount and Bolton, and questioned if Esther was ever paid for her presumed loss of revenue. New York Supreme Court Justice Edward J. McGoldrick ruled The plaintiff has failed to sustain either cause of action by proof of sufficient probable force. That means, in his opinion, based on the totality of evidence presented in the trial, the baby technique of singing did not originate with Helen Kane. No confirmed recordings of Esther Jones are known to exist. Alright, that may have been a bit confusing, so let me break it down for you. Come a little closer. Let me tell you something. Let me be clear. Betty Boop was directly inspired by Helen Kane. We have multiple sources that all say that Helen Kane was the direct inspiration for Betty Boop. Max Fleischer did copy Helen Kane. He later admitted to it. This is why Helen Kane sued for $250,000, which is a lot of money nowadays, but would have been a lot more in the 1930s. Fleischer Studios and Paramount did not want to pay a dime. They started by bringing in Esther Jones, who was another performer at the time. She had a similar style to Helen Kane, and a similar flapper girl, Boop-A-Doop sort of style. Fleischer Studios tried to argue that the Boop-A-Doop style in of itself was very common and that multiple people were doing it, which technically there were. Also, Helen Kane had visited one of Esther Jones' performances in Paris. So, Helen Kane herself might be copying Esther Jones, which was not true, but Fleischer Studios tried to make that connection. So, Paramount and Fleischer Studios basically tried to say that Helen Kane might be copying Esther Jones, along with the fact that Esther Jones and a lot of other actresses at the time were among that Boop-A-Doop sort of style, that same flapper girl sort of style, saying it was very common, trying to say that they had other inspirations for Betty Boop, even though it was Helen Kane. They had also said that Betty Boop was a creation of their own mind, saying that she had enough differentiating features about them, differentiating characteristics about her face and body as to not relate to Helen Kane. And finally, the judge had also ruled that the baby technique did not originate with Helen Kane. So Helen Kane could not claim that she owned or had created the Boop-A-Doop technique, so therefore Betty Boop was not copying or ripping off Helen Kane's deliberate style or deliberate creation. Helen Kane was just the most popular Boop-A-Doop girl at the time. So with all of that said, Fleischer Studios won. Ownership of the Betty Boop cartoons has changed hands over the intervening decades due to the series' corporate mergers, acquisitions, and diversities. In 1954, Paramount Pictures sold the TV rights to UM&M TV Corp. Paramount was selling off all of their library to pay off debts. UM&M TV Corp went bankrupt before they ever distributed the films. They only ever got as far as modifying the original masters with their TV titles. In 1955, National Telefilm Associates purchased all the license and film owned by UM&M TV Corp. And made 16mm prints to distribute to TV stations. In 1985, NTA changed their name to Republic Pictures, since most of their feature film library was the old Republic movies. Aaron Selling Productions absorbed the New Republic Pictures in 1994, and shortly after was acquired by Viacom, which was also acquired by Paramount Pictures yet again. Then in 2006, Viacom made a corporate split into two separate companies, CBS Corporation and Paramount Pictures. As of 2021, Olive Films, under the Paramount Pictures license, holds home video rights, and Trifecta remains television rights. The rights to Betty Boop as a character were not sold with the cartoons by Paramount, but were transferred to Harvey Comics in 1958, along with the famous studio cartoon characters Casper, Herman and Catnip, Baby Huey, and others. Regardless of whether they had the rights to transfer Betty Boop, according to a 2011 U.S. court verdict, the courts, however, were unable to come to a majority decision concerning the ownership of the copyright. A trademark on the name of Betty Boop is owned by Fleischer Studios, but not the legitimacy to her likeness, for which the character was created in the 1930s, but which was unable to claim copyright infringement in a 2008 district court case. The merchandising rights of Betty's name were licensed to King Features Syndicate until 2021, but since have been licensed to Global Icons Inc. So as you can see, not only did everyone want a piece of Betty, they got a piece of Betty. We've got home video rights, TV rights, movie rights. She's got separate rights to her likeness and her name. One company can own a trademark to her name, and the other company can just own her likeness. Betty is scattered into pieces, not to mention comic book rights, merchandising rights, extra characters. Everybody has their hands on Betty, but lo and behold, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Public domain! Public domain! Public domain! Yes, on January 1st, 2026, Betty Boop will enter the public domain, and she will finally be free. But wait, that might just mean she's at the mercy of us now. And comment down below what you want me to paint next, and I'll make a whole breakdown about it. Thank you all for watching.